And my question quite simply is, do we need to wait so long to cover these Singaporeans? Can we not consider how we can cover them now?
If I share what my good brother in the union, Brother Toh Hok Po, will always say when it comes to complex issues, According to MOM, the residual number of low-wage workers who earn below 1,300 is about 100,000 workers. About a quarter of them actually are self-employed, so they wouldn't have benefited from any minimum wage to begin with. With workfare and employers' CPF contribution included, only about 56,000 across a variety of job roles earn less than $1,300. Of these, only about 32,000 are full-time employees. The Workers' Party have called for a minimum wage of $1,300 a month to be applied across all sectors as a quick way to cover everyone else. And as I just highlighted, this is a very small number of 32,000 to 50,000, about 1.7% of our local workforce. But there are actually risks to jumping onto this single blanket minimum wage. First, there is the question of its effectiveness in helping our lowest skilled and most vulnerable workers, and not inevitably putting them at a disadvantage. If it is set too low, then the benefit to workers in many sectors will be limited, and it defeats the purpose of having a minimum wage in the first place. But if the minimum wage is set too high, then businesses, especially the SMEs, cannot afford to pay. They will have to pass the costs on to consumers if they are able to, or cut back on employment of workers of lower educational standards or skills, or in the worst case scenario, go out of business. The second risk with a single blanket minimum wage is the inevitable politicization of wage setting. In a political contest, a political party will surely come along and say, well, $1,500 will reflect higher moral imperatives. Yet another will come along and say, 1,003 is good, 1,005 is better, but 1,007 must surely be more divine moral imperatives. It can become a political auction. A third complication, and this is a major one, is the question of migrant workers. In most developed countries, the legal minimum wage applies to all workers, including migrant workers. If a minimum wage is driven simply by a moral imperative, then the natural question to ask is whether it should include non-Singaporeans, such as migrant workers, including our foreign domestic workers. So perhaps Mr. Singh should also take this chance to explain to Singaporeans what the position of the WP is when you advocate for minimum wage.
For the numbers that the Senior Minister of State had shared, very important figures. I think this is the first time the government has shared these figures. And my question quite simply is, do we need to wait so long to cover these Singaporeans? My second point is about politicization, which was what the minister feared. This is where I think we probably have to really defer to the experts. National Wages Council is potentially one forum. And there's also some useful statistics we can use, like the average household expenditure on basic necessities. Actually, the bigger concern I have with the PWM model, and some of the sectors that SMS has been referring to, is potential profiteering on the back of raising wages for Singaporeans. How can we be sure that as the PWM moves forward, and particularly for raising of salaries, those costs will go to our workers and will not be translated into profits? The minimum wage we're proposing does not include foreign domestic workers at this point. It does not include foreign manpower at this point, because there are other regulatory levers, especially for foreign workers, quotas, levies. I know they serve specific purposes, but I think you will have to implement this and see how best to work the overall manpower situation that SMEs demand and what the economy demands.
I must say it's quite easy to propose a minimum wage, and then when we ask questions about what it's based on and how do you want to implement it, does it include this, foreign workers and all, say the government go sort it out. Research, data, all these are good. If I may use Brother Hockpo's words again, he said, 我吃羊皮的吃比嘴，读册真好， but 爱做真艰苦。
I do not think that supporting SMEs, as I said in my speech just now, is exclusive from supporting a minimum wage, which I mentioned in my maiden speech. In fact, I would just remind everyone that Henry Ford, who invented the automobile, understood this. He said that he has to pay his workers enough so that they can buy his cars. So when we pay our workers enough, it need not be the case that our small businesses end up suffering as a result.
How long does the SMS envisage that rolling out the PWM to all the vulnerable workers who are now earning very low incomes? Why does minimum wage inevitably become politicized, but the PWM model does not also become political football and become politicized?
How long? I think the process will be something that we want to do now, talk about it, discuss it, work out some schematics. And why would the PWM structure be less likely to be politicized? Because it is tripartite negotiation. It is not decided politically by one party. Employers naturally will push back as well. Otherwise, if it's just a single number that's decided based on politics, I think this is where the danger of the slippery slope occurs.